Now we cross over to our Ocean for Global Insight for an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thank you, Mark. It is indeed time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Now, South Korea hit a record low birth rate of 0.84 child per woman in 2020, falling from 0.92 seen a year earlier. The country last year also experienced a population decline as the number of deaths outpaced the number of newborns. Figures show that other advanced economies, including the United States and Italy, are also showing signs of population decline. And without a full U-turn in this trend, it seems these societies are headed for a major demographic crisis. Today, we discuss why people around the world are having less children and whether the pandemic will prolong this trend. Joining us for this discussion is Chung Kwang-hee, Professor of Demography and Sociology at Chungnam National University. And we're also joined by Philip N. Cohen, Professor of Sociology at the University of Maryland. Thank you both for joining us today. Well, let's start with the developments here in South Korea, Professor Chun. Now, South Korea, its birth rate is now at its lowest ever at 0.84 child per woman. So having less than one baby per woman, it's sort of a weird concept to grasp. Can you put this into context for us, please?
In fact, the total fertility rate is the sum of the age-specific birth rate at each age from the 15 to the 49. In fact, the number of children a woman would be expected to have during their lifetime career. If this fertility rate is around 2.0 births, and then the population never grows or declines in the longer terms. This fertility is often called replacement fertility. South Korea's calendar year TFR of 0.84 in 2020 means if this rate remains unchanged in the longer term, the size of the population in 2055 will be about 42% of the size of the current population. Again, in the rate continues to remain unchanged in the long term, the size of the population in 2090, in 70 years later from now on, will be about 18%, about less than 1/5 of the current population size. In fact, South Korea's very, very low birth rate of 0.84 do not just end in the sharp decrease of the size of the childhood population only. This is a trigger mechanism. In fact, eventually leading to the gradual and eventual sharp decrease in the size of the working age population. And then in the turmoil of this demographic collapse and the initial slow but more and more rapid growth of the size of the elderly population takes place. But this low birth rate eventually remained unchanged, and then the size of the elderly population declines, and then total population will collapse. South Korea's population pyramid will be a reverse triangular shape. Wow. Currently, the pyramid is named a Christmas tree shape. It is a euphemistic term, but we must name this pyramid as a coffin-shaped ones. South Korea is currently committing a group suicide, cherishing themselves too much and perishing the next generations. So it casts a serious doubt.
They do seem very daunting indeed. And
yes,
well, Professor
Cohen, and international, intergenerational sustainability.
Sure. So Professor Cohen, now it seems for many years in the United States there was a strangely high birth rate, at least relative to peer nations. But why has this started to decline over the past decade?
Well, the United States had a relatively high birth rate among its peer countries before what we used to call the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. But since that time, the birth rate here has been falling, and it never stopped falling, which we sort of expected it would reach a plateau or start to rise again. And that didn't happen. And then when the COVID-19 crisis arrived, the birth rate fell still more. So last year, in 2020, the US birth rate fell about 4%, which is the greatest one-year drop since the 1970s, the end of the baby boom. And it was even worse in the beginning part of 2021. January and February, birth rates were down about 9% for those months. So quite a big impact of this crisis, which is what we would expect during a time of crisis, birth rates to fall as people pull back from making expensive long-term commitments and making big life changes. But we don't know yet whether this impact will be a long-term impact or will just continue to have a relatively but not drastically low birth rates in the United States.
Professor Chun, how do you think COVID-19 has affected childbirth across different age groups here in South Korea?
In fact, to answer this question, I calculated the mean birth rate during the past presidencies. We started the democratic transitions in 1993. The Kim Young-sam period, mean TF was 1.6. The next regime, Kim Dae-jung, the mean fertility rate 1.4. 0.2 birth drop. Roh Moo-hyun's presidency, 1.2. Lee Myung-bak, 1.2. Park Geun-hye, 1.2. Moon Jae-in, in fact, 0.95. In fact, during two presidents of Kim Dae-jung between the 1998 and 2002, and Roh Moo-hyun, 2003-2007, TFR declined by 15% and 15% respectively. In the transition between Kim Young-sam and Kim Dae-jung, there was an Asian financial crisis, which resulted in massive unemployment among the working age population. In the transition between Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun, there was a huge crisis related to the over-issue of credit card and the failure of housing and real estate policy. In fact, Roh Moo-hyun's pro-natalist population policy were not that very successful, but influential in spreading the idea of social welfare in a sense of populistic. During the center-right conservative presidencies of Lee Myung-bak and Park Geun-hye, the very low fertility rate, which were below 1.3 births, tend to be stable, not showing any notable recovery. During the incumbent Moon Jae-in presidency between the 2017 and 2020, fertility declined by more than 20%, the sharpest decline compared to the previous presidencies. This decline is deeper than the declines experienced by the two center-right presidents, say the center-left presidents, Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun.
To their policies, of course, but to get to you, Professor
So
Cohen.
I am moving to the COVID-19
Sure,
influence.
if you could just summarize that for us, please.
Yes, at this time, COVID-19 might have a strong effect on the sharp decrease in the already very low fertility, 1.2 births at the end of Park Geun-hye's presidency. Fear of infection and fatalities, death, helped Korean women and men avoid pregnancies, raise young children. According to my own estimation, about half of the reduction of the fertility, about 0.1 births per woman, can be explained by the indirect effect of the COVID-19. The rest should be explained by the unintended negative effect of government policy related to the sharp increase in the minimum wage under government's banner of income-induced growth policies.
Right, sure. And now we have to get to you, Professor Cohen. Now, we keep hearing about how productivity is going to be affected by the declining birth rate and the aging population, of course, and how this means that hospice care might suffer. And there are all these concerns, of course, economically, socially, but it hasn't really sunk in yet. It hasn't really translated to our everyday lives. Once it does, though, once the overall size of the population begins to shrink significantly, how is it going to change the way we live?
Well, it takes a long time for the population to start to decline in a way that is noticeable. I mean, we first begin to see changes in the age composition. So we have a decline in the relative number of workers compared to older people. And some of the transition is economically beneficial. Fewer children in schools save some money on schools. But on the other hand, the care burden and the old age expenses of taking care of people in old age increases and so on. And so that's what we notice first. You won't see the impacts of population decline for a while. In the United States, we might not even have population decline if we continue to have immigration at levels that we saw in previous years. So some countries have an easy solution to the problem of population decline because there is a large demand of immigrants who want to move there and can provide a very revitalizing impact on the economy and society. So, but the individuals who are deciding whether or not to have children are not really considering the impact on the whole society. They're asking, how much is it going to cost to have a child? Will I have a job next year? Will I have housing? Will I be able to move into a larger house? Will I have childcare, and so on? And so it's too much a burden to put on individuals making decisions about their own families to make them responsible for the fate of the country. And that's the challenge for policymakers, is to find ways to incentivize the behavior that they want the population to adopt. And it's the track record for doing that is not very successful. Usually, there's not much a government can do about declining birth rates.
And Professor Cohen, well, certainly there have been measures by governments to introduce more welfare policies, more childcare support, better working hours for parents. But of course, these have sort of had limited effect, it seems, at least immediately anyway, in South Korea. And well, there are some who say that there are ways to overcome the challenges of low fertility by investing in the people who've been born already and in technology as well. What do you think about this argument?
Well, increasing productivity is a key component of responding to population, the slowing growth of population. And part of that is, the raising the retirement age and people working longer into older age, and part of it is technology and changing productivity at work. But it is the case that if you invest, one of the challenges is if you invest in workers and make it easier for them to have children, you're also giving them the resources to invest a lot in a smaller number of children. A lot of people might not want to have 2 or 3 children. They might be delighted to have one child and invest heavily in that child and that child's future, especially if they don't need their children to take care of them when they're old and so on. So it really is not. There is no tried and true formula for governments increasing birth rates once they get to this very low level. And I think the important question is how we're going to deal with the very likely occurrence of a continuing birth rate decline.
Certainly a challenge with this coronavirus pandemic throwing us all off as well. And well, lastly, before we go, Professor John, just want to hear your thoughts and maybe perhaps just a minute. What do you see as sort of the long-term solutions for South Korea, which currently now, it's tried and failed many different kind of measures to boost the birth rate, and it also doesn't really have an immigration policy that's there to come up with an alternative to this population crisis that we're having.
In fact, I must say immigration could be stopgap measures, but it is not real solutions. We have to solve our problems on our own. In fact, the incumbent Moon Jae-in government's basic plan, that's the fifth plan to address low fertility and aging society focused on welfare policy, merely responding to the symptoms and aims to halt further declines in birth rate. It is not likely this plan will be able to escape from the pitfalls of populist policy. In fact, the Moon and succeeding government should more aggressive, seek more aggressive strategies in the area of jobs and housings, and refer to the successful improvement of birth rate by the Germans' Merkel settlements and birth incentive policies in Germany. Also, I think the government should be more focused on the policy for the single woman. Marriages are rapidly increasing these years, reaching 34 to 35 years for the boys and ages 2 or 3 years younger than the girls. Current birth rate of 0.84 also means the first birth rate is about 0.56 birth. Second or higher order birth is 0.28. In fact, the first birth rate is 0.56 birth, which means about 44% of the women in marriageable childbearing ages are in the state of singlehood. This is a real problem. The government should focus on this woman in single state of marriages. In fact, I must say the Korean government should cooperate with the business and local community to promote fertility. In fact, this is the best strategy to attack the aging problems and population declines. This is not be done by passively responding to the falling
yes, definitely,
birth rate.
we're going to have to see more policies that really reassure people that they can have children and really reassure them that they can handle all this, what seems like a burden in the years and decades to come, with household debt and the unavailability of affordable housing. Now, we're going to have to wrap up the conversation here. That was Gang Professor of Demography and Sociology at Chungnam National University, and Philip N. Cohen, Professor of Sociology at University of Maryland. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.